Good afternoon, everyone. As I told you late last night, I would give you an update as to the deputy-involved shooting that occurred on Congress Street in Auburndale. And here is a recap. Most of the information we gave you last night was spot on, and we're going to add some details today so that you will have a clear understanding. This is the firearm that Juan Rafael Rosa, who's 35 years of age, pointed at our deputy and our sergeant last night. And here's the circumstances. We received a call from the mother who said that, hey, he's enraged, he's combative, I've talked to his siblings, there's nothing I can do with him. Today's his birthday. I traditionally take him out on his birthday. He won't go out to eat. We've got to have help. That's not an unusual call, ladies and gentlemen. We receive thousands, did you hear me? Let me underscore, thousands of calls every year for folks that are in mental health crisis. And we respond. And obviously, the overwhelming majority of them are peacefully resolved, with us taking the person to the hospital under the Baker Act. Not so on this particular evening. Juan told his mother, if you call 911, I will end it right now. And that's exactly what he did. Juan had a long history of mental illness. He was schizophrenic, bipolar, and suffered from depression. When the deputies arrived, and the two deputies that arrived are certified in crisis intervention training, it's called CIT. In fact, 100% of our deputies, both in detention and law enforcement, receive the certification of crisis intervention training so that we can deal with those folks in mental health crisis. They arrived, they talked to Mom. Are there any firearms in the residence? No, there aren't. There may be some knives. There are no firearms in the residence. Does Juan have a firearm? No, he does not have a firearm. So as a result, they go to the bedroom door, which is closed. Juan's mother, Nelis, says, you have company. He doesn't respond. They take her out of the hallway into the living room, out of the way, and they knock on the door and announce, Sheriff's Office. We're here to help you. Sheriff's Office. Juan Rafael Rosa opens the door with a handgun and points it at the two deputies. They immediately defend themselves from a deadly threat by shooting Juan, who's holding this gun, which is loaded with ammunition. They shoot him. They fire 8 shots, 4 apiece. He falls to the ground. They were able to get this firearm away from him at that point in time. They immediately render assistance to him, where he's transferred to Lakeland Regional Hospital, and he dies. This is, without a doubt, a classic suicide by cop. He had the opportunity to crank off a round at the deputies, and he didn't. But he immediately pointed that gun, and in that split second, my deputies made the exact right decision to protect themselves from a deadly use of force against them. At the end of the day, it's sad. It's sad for everyone. My heart breaks for Juan's mother, his siblings, but I'm angry with Juan. He is the one that chose the path that made us have to shoot him. We didn't choose to shoot him. He chose for us to shoot him. And I'm angry about that. I'm angry that he didn't give us the opportunity to help him. I'm angry that he was tormenting and frightening his mother to the point that she called the siblings. The siblings said, call 911. Ladies and gentlemen, this circumstance here repeats itself often with people in mental health crisis. Way too often. But let me set this aside for a second to tell you that we've worked several suicides over the Christmas holidays. They seem to increase. But we literally work dozens and dozens of suicides throughout the year from those suffering mental health crisis. We save and can help thousands and thousands, multiple thousands of people every year where we're called. But to this event today was to turn out this way because Juan clearly told his mother, if you call 911, I'm going to end it now. And he was true to his word. I'm also sorry that I've got two deputies that for the rest of their life have to live with the fact that they took someone's life in order to save their own life. And quite frankly, the next step was that if they hadn't have taken that immediate action, he would have shot in order to get them to shoot. But they reacted to that immediate threat as they should have. And now Juan is deceased. He's left a horrible scar on his mother, his siblings, and the deputies that went there to do nothing more than help him and help his mother because the son was in crisis. Any questions?
Sheriff, you're not sure when somebody's pointing a gun at you if it's loaded or not. So you've got to, do your best guess. You find out now that it was loaded. How do you react to that?
Well, anytime someone points a gun at us, it's loaded. Anytime someone points a gun at us that turns out to be a BB gun, it's a loaded gun because you're making the decision that quick. After the shooting, Juan's mother looked at the deputies and said, quote, all he's got in the room is a airsoft or a BB gun. And he had one of those in his room. It was on his bed. Now, Juan's mother didn't lie to us. We don't believe for a second she lied to us. She didn't know that he had a real firearm loaded with ammunition, a .32 caliber firearm. But he did. And he pointed it at us. And I can tell you unequivocally that deputies are trained and have to be trained to immediately respond to that threat. First and foremost, I expect my deputies to go home well and safe at the end of the night. Unfortunately, when we tell that to the public, to the media, when we say clearly, if you point a gun at our deputies, you're going to be shot, that's a warning to not point guns. Unfortunately, it also markets the fact if you want to commit suicide and don't want to do it yourself, point a gun at a deputy. And we've seen that eventuality happen twice in less than 3 months. And it makes me sick to my stomach that we're there. I've been in law enforcement my entire adult life. We're seeing more mental health issues, more mental health crises now than ever in the decades of experience that I have. Ladies and gentlemen, they want to talk about an opioid crisis. They want to talk about, you name the crisis. They want to talk about immigration. Why aren't we talking about the real problem? the mental health crisis, where there's not sufficient resources, there's not sufficient what I would call in custody locations for those that are significantly mentally ill, that there's not programs and housing. That's the crisis that we see in law enforcement every day. And you know what? This guy, Juan, he had a psychiatrist. He had access to mental health assistance. And still, this was the eventuality because he chose that to occur on his birthday.
Did his mother mention, was there anything that changed in his life recently that could have led to this? I heard he just moved back with her maybe a month or so ago.
I know that recently he was arrested in North Carolina or received a notice to appear for shoplifting at a big box outlet. So I don't know where he was or why he was there, but he was back home living with her. And that's what mothers do. They accept their children back because mothers love unconditionally. And she was at her wit's end. There was nothing else she could do. She consulted the siblings. They said call 911. And it frustrates us as law enforcement officers. You see, we're no longer just law enforcement officers. We're social services officers. We're compassionate officers. And we don't mind taking on the additional responsibility if it helps the community. But we have lasting scars whenever we're not able to successfully help someone. And when a Juan appears with a gun and he's decided to die today, we can't control his conduct. We can only control our response to make sure my deputies go home alive and well, and I absolutely intend for them to go home alive and well. Yes, ma'am?
When you say notice to appear, meaning he was supposed to go back to North Carolina to go to court?
I don't know. I don't know what that circumstance was. I know that he was at least in North Carolina long enough to get charged criminally up there.
Speaking of mental health, are you guys investigating when he got hold of this gun and if it was licensed to him?
He has no felony convictions. He had every right to purchase and own that firearm. Now, if he was significantly mentally ill, and if his psychiatrist did the appropriate paperwork, by federal law, he could have been prevented from buying a firearm. Do you know how often that occurs? Like almost never will a psychiatrist say, look, this person has significant issues and they should not be allowed to have a firearm. So at the end of the day, that's just a rule. That's just a rule if they used it. That doesn't stop him from obtaining a firearm illegally if he was prohibited legally from obtaining one. It's called human conduct. And human conduct does not always comply with society's norms.
Sheriff, you were saying that we're having a lot of suicide by cop and mental issues, and you just mentioned that
Across the nation.
Basically because he didn't have a felony conviction, even though it was known that he was schizophrenic and bipolar, that he still can legally purchase a gun unless his psychiatrist does paperwork to prevent it. Is that something that needs to be changed at the state level?
They're not using the laws that are in place now. There are laws in place now where if somebody's deemed mentally incompetent, they can be prohibited from legally owning a firearm. You can't keep anyone from owning a firearm that wants to violate the rules. That's why you got to understand in society, this is not a perfect world, even though we would like that. It's based on us all being rule followers. There are people in this society that don't follow rules. There are people in society that don't follow rules because they have mental health issues. And this gentleman here, Juan, was in crisis. His mother was trying to help him. He refused. His mom was trying to make it better. He refused. He threatened his mom, if you call 911, I'll end it right now. And he did. He lived up to his promise. So when someone decides on their own, whether rationally or irrationally, that they're going to do something, then until there's a force to stop them, they can continue to do whatever that conduct is. And that's what occurred last night.
Where did the gun come from? Did he buy it or?
Don't know where it came from. We're less than 24 hours, obviously, into this investigation. Those kind of issues and answers we hope we can ascertain as the investigation goes forward.
Sheriff, what is your answer to those people that might say, like on a lot of social media postings, people were saying, you know, why are officers trained to shoot to kill? Why not use a stun gun or a dart that knocks them out? What's your
Yeah,
answer to those people?
you know, I'm always energized by people's comments on social media. They know nothing and they write even less on social media. They don't have a clue. But they're welcome to come down to Human Resources, get an application, and come be a law enforcement officer with us, and we'll give them all those opportunities. However, we won't train them and won't allow them to have a stun gun when a guy's pointing a real gun at them. Had the circumstances changed, had mom said, but mom told us the truth, had mom said, he's got a gun in that bedroom, he said, if I dial 911, I'm going to end it now. Now, she told us that, but she had no way of knowing he had a gun. We wouldn't have walked up and knocked on the door, but we confirmed, our first responders and communications confirmed he didn't have a gun. He does not have a gun. Had we known he had a gun, it would have been a totally different response that night. We would have made him come out to us. If that meant forcing him out with chemical agent, we would have. So our response is calculated on the data and information we receive. But you can imagine what all these cameras would have been asking today, except instead of like 6 or 7, there would have been like 25 of them, if we'd have gassed up Mama's house. And you went, you put gas in the house because a guy was in mental health crisis and there was no gun in there?
We haven't heard the 911 call. I'm assuming the mom was speaking in English?
She was. She clearly communicated with us.
And also, Peace River Center, they have their crisis unit where you can call their 24-hour hotline for people in crisis. Would that have been an option for this mom instead of calling 911, or?
This man had a psychiatrist that I'm told early in the investigation, subject to change, he could have Facebooked or FaceTimed with. Here's what you need to understand. When you call these mental health hotlines and you're in mental health crisis, if they can't talk you down, guess who they call? Us. They call us. They call us. So you have to understand, and we don't expect the social media IQ to understand, okay? Because they don't understand anything that they don't want to understand. You've got to understand that when you call a law enforcement officer into a mental health crisis event, we are trained in this county. We know how to recognize it. We know how to respond to it. We know how to help. And we do that thousands and thousands of times a year, even though you could argue we shouldn't be the primary responder. But there should be a mental health crisis team. But guess what that mental health crisis team would have done that night? when confronted with that firearm? They'd have called us. If we weren't there working a homicide when he shot and killed one of them. So at the end of the day, we have untold millions of people across this country in mental health crisis today. They're not all violent. They're not all dangerous. And we can't tell the difference until they are. So let me underscore, for those who suffer from mental health issues, they're not all violent. They're not all dangerous. They're not all suicidal. They're not all homicidal. But we don't know they are until they are. And when they are, and we're there, we've got to protect ourselves. Nobody wanted to resolve that more peacefully last night than that sergeant and lieutenant that were there. They were there to help that family who had a real crisis. We weren't allowed to because Juan Rosa wouldn't allow us to. He forced us to shoot him. It was his decision, not our decision.
Does he have any children?
I don't know. Thank you very much. Have a good weekend if I don't see you before. Have a happy new year, and we'll see you later.